I want to make something very clear. It's not just Republicans who have been bought off by the fossil fuel industry who are responsible for the inaction from our government on the issue of climate change. A lot of corporate establishment Democrats also take money from the fossil fuel industry, but even more of them take money from the Wall Street banks that provide the loans that finance the fossil fuel industry. So a lot of these corporatists have financial incentive not to address climate change. As a result, they also look the other way and allow corporations like Exxon to release insane amounts of pollution into the environment unabated while making billions of dollars in profit. In fact, a lot of times corporate Democrats go out of their way to fight progressives to block necessary policies to address climate change and regulate the fossil fuel industry. Ever since Nancy Pelosi became Speaker of the House again in January, she has done nothing but prove the point I'm making. I believe it was the first week of the new Congress when the Sunrise Movement did their protest outside of Nancy Pelosi's office. Dozens, if not hundreds, of young activists planted themselves outside of her office to pressure her into supporting the Green New Deal. Then, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, newly elected Congresswoman, took the unprecedented step of joining the protesters outside of the Speaker's office. She talked to them, she took questions, she made statements to the press, and she backed the Green New Deal right outside of Nancy Pelosi's office and urged her to do the same. Before I go any further, it cannot be overstated how bold of a move this was by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez because she was just there on orientation. That was her first week in Congress, and she's already making moves like that. I don't even think they handed out committee assignments yet. So everyone at the time, especially the freshman class, was sucking up to Nancy Pelosi and kissing her ass, trying to get a good committee assignment and stay on the good side of Democratic leadership. But in her typical fashion, AOC didn't give a fuck about any of that. She wasn't trying to beat around the bush or hedge her bets. She saw a group of activists protesting, trying to get our government to address a serious issue. She agreed with them, so she did her part to bring attention to that issue and to try to pressure Democratic leadership into supporting a Green New Deal and appointing a special committee dedicated to climate change. But of course, Democratic leadership has no intention of doing a Green New Deal, which is why they've never brought it up before. So the fact that AOC would pull a stunt like this, much less on her first week in Congress, I know that stuck in Nancy Pelosi's craw. But AOC got so much attention to the Green New Deal and the Climate Change Committee that it was almost untenable for Nancy Pelosi to just completely ignore her. So to get progressives and some people in the media off her back, she decided that she would actually set up a committee on climate change. But as the days passed, it became clear that this was just political theater. The committee would have no subpoena power, so they wouldn't even be able to do real investigations. Without subpoena power, you can't force people to testify under oath, and you also can't force anyone to hand over documents. This means fossil fuel executives and their lobbyists would be off limits to the committee. They aren't going to willingly testify or hand over documents that incriminate them. They knowingly, actively contributed to the climate crisis just to benefit themselves financially. Even the most mild investigation into any energy company you can think of would prove that almost instantly. Further proof that this entire committee was just a sham. The committee doesn't even have the power to introduce legislation in the House. It was very clear early on that this committee would have no teeth. As if this wasn't bad enough, Nancy Pelosi also refused to add a rule that would prevent anyone who takes money from the fossil fuel industry from serving on this committee. Would be, a huge fucking deal, seeing how these same exact politicians who take money from the fossil fuel industry has been providing them cover this whole time and blocking any legislation on the issue of climate change. So why the fuck would you put them on the committee? So let's recap this real quick. After she was publicly shamed about her inaction on climate change, an issue that threatens the existence of life on the entire planet, her response was to create some do-nothing committee that has almost no investigatory power. It can't introduce legislation, and it would also be stacked with people who are on the take for the fossil fuel industry. So what the fuck is even the point of the committee if it's not just political theater? Because it can't do anything else. Mind you, this is Nancy Pelosi we're talking about, the Democratic Speaker of the House. This is a party that everyone would have you believe is serious about climate change, that knows it's an existential threat and poses serious danger to life on the planet. Like I mentioned before, scientists agree that we have a 10-year window to get to zero emissions to avoid the most cataclysmic events of climate change. And Nancy Pelosi's response is, fuck it, I'll just throw them a toothless, hollow, fucking kabuki theater committee that isn't really going to do anything. Which brings me to her response when she was asked about AOC's Green New Deal. As you'd expect, she was extremely condescending and could not hide her disdain for progressives and progressive policy. When asked by a reporter what she thinks about the proposal from AOC, her response was, quote, "It will be one of several or maybe many suggestions that we receive. The green dream, or whatever they call it, nobody knows what it is, but they're for it, right?" You can just hear the contempt that she has for AOCs and progressives just oozing out of that response. Just look at what she says. Quote, "It will be one of several or maybe many suggestions that we receive." So even though, to my knowledge, this is the most comprehensive policy plan to address climate change within the window given to us by climate scientists ever to be proposed by a member of Congress, she couldn't be bothered to learn any of the specifics and bring them up when she was asked about it. The specific proposals in this deal are actually really good, and what many would say is the gold standard, the baseline of what needs to be done to address climate change. Instead, she's just already lumping it in with non-existent plans and saying, well, I'll just look at all of them and I'll see what I like. It's like I mentioned, she doesn't really have any intention of addressing climate change. She's just going to punt and kick the can down the road as long as possible. But what really showed her true colors and pissed off a lot of progressives, including myself, was what she said next. Quote, "The green dream, or whatever they call it, nobody knows what it is, but they're for it, right?" Really? Green dream or whatever you call it? Nancy Pelosi, you don't know what the Green New Deal is? A month ago, there was over 100 protesters and a freshman congresswoman blocking your office and demanding you support a Green New Deal on your first week back as Speaker of the House. You know what a Green New Deal is. She may not know all the specific details, which she should, and it's kind of inexcusable that she doesn't. But I guarantee she at least knows the idea and the premise, and definitely the name, the Green New Deal. See, I think the reason why she's playing dumb is so that she can yet again sneak another jab in at progressives by saying, "You're not on my radar." You might think you're actually advancing your policy agenda, but nothing gets passed unless I sign off on it, and I don't even know what the name is. Then she suggested that progressives don't even know what's in the deal, but they're fighting for it anyway. That's why I say she's dismissive of us, because look at how she speaks about the base of her own party. She acts like we're a bunch of dumb, fucking mindless kids in a clique, and we're just supporting this because we see that AOC introduced it. It's honestly fucking crazy that you would say something like that about the base of your own party, where all the energy and the activism and the grassroots organizing in, that's what she thinks about us. She does not believe that our grievances are merited, and in this case specifically on the issue of climate change. But that's my point. That's the point of this whole video. The establishment of the Democratic Party, the leadership has no intention of addressing climate change. Yeah, the Republicans are bad on this issue, but in some ways, what the Democrats are doing is even more insidious. Because the whole time, for decades now, we've known about how serious climate change is. They pay lip service to the issue in order to placate the base of the party and not look as insane and fucking extreme as the Republicans. But notice whenever the time comes to actually fight for real policies to address climate change or to actually spend some political capital to get something done, they won't ever lift a fucking finger to actually make it happen because their donors won't allow it. It's not just Nancy Pelosi, it's the entire leadership of the Democratic Party. So my message to elected progressives like AOC and Bernie Sanders and Ro Khanna and Tulsi Gabbard and Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar is the same as it's been, and I'm starting to sound like a fucking broken record. The establishment, the leadership of the Democratic Party, has no intention of ever passing progressive policy priorities. So you need to clobber them over the head with incontrovertible facts. And you need to apply immense public pressure to beat them into submission or run them out of office, because there's no way they're just going to do what you want because you asked them nicely. They are not honest actors. They are corrupt. They live in an establishment bubble. They are out of touch and have no idea what the American people want, and they don't give a fuck what is best for the future of the planet if it contradicts the bottom line of their donors.